Well, now Germany plans to hold a summit on Libya on January the 19th. And to tell us a little bit more about that, we're now joined by our correspondent Ira Spitzer, who's in Berlin. Ira, thanks very much indeed for joining us. How is it that Germany came to be holding this summit on Libya?
Well, this has been in the works for quite a while. The foreign ministers of several nations were in Berlin several months ago to sort of prepare for a summit, which now appears to be taking place on the 19th. And what has really happened here is that European countries have largely been pushed aside to some extent by Russia and Turkey, who have now taken prominent roles in this process. And we saw German Chancellor Angela Merkel heading to Moscow over the weekend, where she met with Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, and they talked about, among other things, Libya, which is, of course, an extremely delicate and extremely volatile situation. We see that ceasefire now in effect. So what's going to happen, we expect, is that on Sunday there will be a meeting of the key players. There have been reports that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is going to come to Berlin. So this will, of course, be an extremely important meeting if this all goes as planned, considering the importance of this process.
So you've mentioned Turkey and Russia in particular. Why is it that they've taken such a prominent role, and even more so Turkey?
Well, Turkey, as you mentioned in the introduction, is a supporter of the UN-backed government in Libya, which actually just controls a very small amount of that country, largely the capital city of Tripoli. So Turkey appears to be propping up that government at the moment, because that government shares some of Turkey's interests. Turkey perhaps also sees an opportunity to have a much more influence in Libya because of its support of that government. Now, Europe is somewhat divided on who they support. France has previously appeared to support Khalifa Haftar, the opposition leader there. Now, Germany has been largely neutral so far, and that could perhaps be why Germany could become this sort of key mediator in the process, because it hasn't actually appeared to choose sides so far.
And I would imagine for Europe, this is an important issue that needs to be settled, given the number of refugees that leave Libya and end up in Europe.
The instability in the northern African nation of Libya has certainly had an effect that goes far beyond the borders of that country. You mentioned the refugee crisis. Because of the lawlessness there, most of the refugees who come from sub-Saharan Africa to Europe pass through Libya. So that is something that is of concern to European governments, including Germany, of course. We've also seen that instability extend throughout the Sahel region, where the situation in Libya has created opportunities for the flow of weapons and fighters and things of that nature. So for Europe, which is so close to Libya, just across the Mediterranean Sea, this peace process is certainly something that affects the Europeans' own sense of stability and Europe's interests here. So that is why this is such an important issue, and why we're seeing world leaders such as Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin very intimately involved in the Libyan peace process right now.
So Libya has been pretty much unstable since 2011, when Muammar Gaddafi was ousted. And I mean, this is a long time. It's almost 10 years now. Is there a real hope that a solution can be found? The different parties, what are they essentially fighting for?
Well, I think there's certainly hope that there can be a resolution to this civil war in Libya, which, as you mentioned, has gone on for over a decade. Now, in terms of how realistic that is, it's hard to say at the moment. I think there is certainly a fear on all sides, including in Europe, of an escalation in Libya, such as what we've seen in a place like Syria, and that has, of course, had disastrous consequences. So I do think there is some momentum now to try and scale back this conflict and bring in some players from the outside to try and calm things down. However, on the other hand, we did see both Turkey announcing that they are ready to send troops to Libya, perhaps not in a fighting role, but in a support role. And then there also have been charges that there are Russian fighters, perhaps not connected to the government, but Russian fighters on the other side in Libya. So this conflict is taking on perhaps some worrying new dimensions. So that is something that has given at least motivation in Europe and elsewhere to try and really accelerate these peace talks. But a lot at stake here, and we have to first see how this ceasefire, which was just agreed very recently, how that goes and whether that's able to hold, and if indeed these talks in Berlin on January 19th will take place.
All right, so remind us again, who's going to be seated at the table on January the 19th? I would imagine that General Khalifa Haftar pretty much has to be there. There are other groupings, but he seems to be the one that kind of they coalesce around.
Right. Well, the first thing I should say is that we don't know exactly who will be at the table at that meeting on January 19th. And in fact, we don't even know for sure whether that meeting will happen. The German government has not officially confirmed that, although it does seem very likely at this point. But yes, Khalifa Haftar, the Libyan general who has been leading this siege of Tripoli for the past 9 months, would of course be a key player there. We've also expect that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will come to Berlin for that meeting. So then we would likely have somebody from the UN-backed Libyan government, as well as Chancellor Angela Merkel. But the actual involved people who will be involved in the meeting will probably have to wait a couple more days to have that information.
All right, Ira Spitzer, we're going to have to leave it there for the time being. Thanks very much indeed for that update, and we look forward to seeing how this story unfolds. Thanks so much for your time. All right, that's our correspondent, Ira Spitzer, speaking to us from Berlin, where we're seeing Angela Merkel has put together this summit on Libya, and the parties, the protagonists in the Libyan conflict, which has really now been running for about 10 years. They're trying to find a resolution to that, and we'll give you details on that. But we stay